I'm sorry to say that if you salivate just talking about native foods, this probably isn't a good class for you. Because we're going to talk about Tlingit food, and we're not going to get to have any. Tuyak eir satini, shak sani kik yuchatu asak, kagwantan na hatsiti dilkat kwan, ach tlaku a tlikindu, gau hittach, ach ishko a sakuyi, Tlingit Sitien, Yel Kudi Hittach. I want to thank my parents, Frank and Nancy St. Clair. They passed on quite a few years ago, but I want to say thank you to them anyway because of what they taught me is what you're going to hear about. And this is my credentials. It's to talk about this because we went to collect foods starting in April, and we didn't finish until October. So it is something that my parents really wanted me to know. And I was talking to somebody outside, and we would start quite early. And picking berries. My sister Anita is there, and we used to tell our mom, we can't go, it's raining. And my mom would say, here's your raincoat. And we would go anyway. So I was getting ready to do this, and until just recently I discovered that you don't write with the quill pen anymore. And sitting through all the presentations, it was amazing to me, all the computer work that is shown. So I quickly got my granddaughter to set me up for. And what I want to talk to you about is the nutrition that I learned in college and the study that they have done. And nutrition is the study of the nutrients and how it affects our bodies. They figured it out to the point where how many servings you have to have in order to stay as a healthy person. So that's what they studied. They called was cool. So it was amazing to me when I studied this, that if to stay healthy you needed, they recommended a certain number of servings per day. For milk and yogurt and cheese, you need 2 to 3 servings depending on your age. So that one is just kind of muddled. But meat and poultry and beans and eggs, you need 2 to 3 servings a day. Vegetables, 3 to 5 servings. Fruit, 2 to 4 servings. Cereal and breads, rice, 6 to 11 servings a day to stay healthy. And then, of course, recently they added fats, oils, and sugars that you can have just a little bit. I don't know how many people do that, but that is part of the pyramid food plan. And this picture that we have up here is a white man's pyramid on the foods. And when you look at it, you see where the meat is. And if we were to look at this list that you have on your table, and we started putting some of these foods onto this pyramid, it would be so lopsided with all the meat and fish that the whole thing would just fall over. And we don't have any bread. And we don't have and the fruits and the vegetables in the sense that they think about it. So it was really worrisome to study about this in science because you when you look at the native foods, it doesn't quite work. But then those of you that have been here throughout the whole time have been looking at pictures of Tlingits and Haida, Southeast people, when white man first came, healthy looking people. They were slim, they had good hair, good skin, even if they were old, and their eyes were nice and clear. These are the things that you can tell about a person's good health when you see them. Their teeth, you know they had all their teeth because their faces were nice and full. And so they were in good health. And how did they do it? They didn't have this chart. There wasn't a scientist that said, okay, for breads and cereals, you better substitute this, and how can we do it? And it really frustrated me when I thought about this, but there is a way to look at this. The chart is divided into sections, and each one has a very determined amount of nutrients that you have to have every day. Sometimes called vitamins and proteins. So the chart is really useful. And this part of the talk, I want to call it Tlingit.thanks. This is our knowledge, this is our science as to how we stay healthy, and we stayed healthy. So if you want to listen to this and wait till and be very amazed at the knowledge that the old people had, I want to start with meats and what is it in meats that is very important. And we don't have any problem in meeting that because we have a lot of deer and seal meat and all the wonderful different meats. We don't have to worry about the quality of the protein or what is in it. Protein is important to build up maintain your body. It repairs everything, and for growth. And later on, when we talk about milk, we will find that our people were quite tall, always have been, even in first contact. Protein was easy for us to get, and we'll just kind of breeze by that because we know we meet the requirements of having that, meeting that portion of the requirements. Then there's phosphorus, and phosphorus, when you think about it, if you're a fisherman or if you've been on boats, you see the green as you're going through the sea, the phosphorus light that lights up in the water as you go by. That's phosphorus, and you need that in your body. And it plays a very important part of our diet. It's the second most abundant mineral. It's a mineral in our body. And it's important to our blood and to our DNA. And RNA is something you don't hear much about. You hear a lot about, well, that matches my DNA. But RNA is a messenger system in our bodies, RNA. And that's really important for that to stay healthy, and you need the phosphorus for that. So it's also very necessary to growth. When the DNA needs something, it sends RNA, go get this, and they quickly go and pick it up and bring it back. And that's what RNA is. It brings a message back. And it has to be good and complete protein from the meats. So that's why phosphorus is very important to our bodies. And the B vitamins also needs phosphorus to keep working, to do its work. And this is also very important. Later on we'll talk about the bones and the teeth. to have phosphorus. It's found in milk and bones and things like that. So we'll talk about what we need to eat to get that. When I'm going to have a list of what you should eat of the Tlingit food in order to get these vitamins, and some things will be left off. And the reason for that is not all the native foods have been analyzed, and it costs a lot of money to do it. So what I have, and just some guesses, we'll go through the list. Vitamin B6 is found in meats, and it's needed to transfer. Your body does a lot of work transferring things. So it stores the vitamins. It's one of the vitamins that can be stored, and it's kind of interesting because a lot of times we can't store things, especially vitamins. Vitamin B12 is found only in meats. So if you're not a meat eater, or if you have a child that doesn't eat meat, then this vitamin is lacking because it's only found in meats, and it's very healthy for our blood. I'm trying to go fast. Zinc is another mineral. It's important for the white cell function and growth development. To get this zinc, you need to eat clams, deer meat, seagull eggs, duck eggs, liver. If you don't like liver, you're going to find out a lot of things about that today. Off the list. So then we need another mineral, magnesium. Magnesium is a long word, and you think, why do I have to have that? This is very important for working with the sugar in your system. When you eat sugar, it works on this, and if we have a lot of diabetes in our tribes, and this protein, magnesium, metabolizes fat and sugar in your system. And it's also very important for blood clotting. It's amazing how God worked this out so that we don't bleed to death when we get a cut. It causes a blood clotting. And also, at the same time, the interesting thing about magnesium is it helps with the blood clotting, and it also keeps it from all your blood to clot. It only clots in that where the cut is. So you're getting a real fast overview here. To get this, salmon eyes. My brother used to say, watch this. Put it in his mouth. Salmon eyes have lots of magnesium in it. Deer meat, clams, cockles, seagull eggs, duck eggs, goose eggs, all those eggs. Iron. Everybody knows what iron is. The women, we have to sometimes take iron pills. And the reason that you have it is all the iron that you find is in your blood. And the iron is a carrier of oxygen. It works in your blood cell, and when you exercise and your body's really working hard, the oxygen is carried by the iron in your blood to the muscle that you're exercising so that you can withstand that. So the iron is a carrier of oxygen in your system. So when you're low in iron, then you feel tired. And that's a real clue for us. So we have a lot of food that has a lot of iron. Liver. deer stomach. We were talking about deer stomach and well, how good these things are. We never thought about what it does. It just tastes so good going down and tasting it. Gumboots, seagull eggs, duck eggs, seal meat. Seal is very interesting in the way that it is designed. The seal can dive for about 20 minutes. So it goes underwater and it takes the air in just like us if we take a deep breath and go. But a seal, when it takes a deep breath, the oxygen goes into the muscle and it stays there so that the seal can stay underwater for about 20 minutes without coming up. And that's why the meat is so dark, because it's high in iron. So if you get seal meat and you cook that up, you're getting a lot of iron from that. Plus the fact that we usually cook it with the bones in it. Seaweed, black seaweed, because it has a lot of minerals. It does have a lot of iron. Niacin, I always think niacin, okay, drink a cup of tea, you'll get niacin. It helps in, also, this is very important, so I think you need to really think a lot about this, because this is something else that helps with the sugar in your system and also metabolizes fat. Your body can make this vitamin if you don't eat it. And in order to get it from the native foods, you need to eat liver. So if you don't like liver, you better start looking at this list and start thinking about how you can start including liver in your diet. Halibut, pink salmon, all the salmons that are on the list, shrimp, crab meat, and herring eggs. Niacin. If you don't have this, then your body will make some of it, but you need to start ingesting some of this so that your body will have a store of it. Thiamine, another vitamin, which is a B vitamin. It's important to your nervous system. I've heard some people say, I started on a diet and I decided not to eat breakfast. And I don't understand why I'm so shaky. It's because the thiamine, if you don't have that in your system, your nervous system, it's going to show up. And that first place it shows up is in your hand, and you feel nervous. So this is important. And how do you get it? From the native foods, by eating oysters, herring eggs, dried fish. And I was looking at dried fish. It looks like when you get the salmon and you cut it up and you dry it and smoke it, and when it gets dry, it increases the vitamins and other nutrients in the salmon. So there's a certain amount of nutrients in it, but it's increased when you dry it. So dried fish is good. Seal meat, eggs, and deer liver. Yeah. Okay, so then we want to look at the chart again and see the vegetables. How many vegetables on the list, and when do you get it? When you look at that list, we get most of it in the spring and in the summer. After that, we don't have it. So how did the traditional Tlingits meet this requirement? Because it's really important, very important. And you know they had it because of looking at the old pictures, you realize that they were very healthy. We eat vegetables, and the requirement on this chart is because you get your vitamin A. And vitamin A is good for what? Eyesight. Very good for your eyesight. It's a fat-soluble vitamin. In other words, it's stored in the fat in your body. And it's stored in the liver, where it can be picked up by your body to do its work. It's very delicate. There are several kinds of vitamin A's, and each vitamin A is very carefully handled. There's a system where it comes to pick up the vitamin A and carefully carried over to where it's needed by one kind of protein. Then another protein goes and picks up another kind and very carefully carries it over. So each vitamin A is handled very, very carefully by your body. So you get good vision and good cell health. And your immune system is very good because of that. So what do you need to eat? Of course, liver, oysters. Seal oil is very high off the chart. My mom made me take cod liver oil when I was a kid. Oh my goodness, that was so terrible. That was really terrible stuff to take. And I was very fortunate that the nurse finally told her that seal oil is the same, except I have to have more. Oh, I was so happy. She used to put it in a fancy teacup, almost full. 1 cup for me and 1 cup for my brother. And the requirement was we had to sip on that all day. And it's amazing, it's a thirst quencher. When we got really thirsty, we'd run in, take a sip of that. That was so wonderful. And then when it's time for dinner, we, whatever was left, we brought it and added it to our foods. So salmon, you know, salmon color is the color of vitamin A. Especially, I think sockeye probably has the highest amount of vitamin A because of the really deep dark color. Black seaweed. Deer stomach, because the way we cook, the way we handle the deer stomach is we don't really wash it out that much. We have this first stomach that has all the greens in it. We do clean that out, and a lot of times you don't spend that much time cleaning it. Like the tripe that you buy in the store is so white it doesn't even look real. So we just cut it up and cook it and serve it. And that's where we get a lot of vitamin A, and it's amazing how much vitamin A that has. Gumboots is really high because when you look at the inside of the gumboots, it's orange. This is a clue. Orange color, when it's like carrot color, it's a clue that vitamin A exists in there. Vitamin C is a bodyguard, keeps us from having colds, antioxidants. It's easily destroyed, and this is something you have to keep in mind when you pick berries. If you buy one of those berry pickers from the store and you pick up leaves and dirt and everything with it, and then you have to go home and wash it, be very careful because the water you're throwing out has a lot of vitamin C in it. How did we protect that? Before I go into that, let me give you the list of what you need to eat to get vitamin C. You need to eat strawberries. Rose hips, extremely high. We used to go around and pick those when they were ripe. You have to open it and take all the seeds out before you eat it. Raspberries. And guess what? Liver. Lots of berries. And this is the thing that the people did that was really amazing to me when you study this. The berries have vitamin C that goes into water. So if you wash your berries and pour out the water, you're dumping out a lot of vitamin C. The Tlingit people would clean the berries and put it in seal oil. There's two things that the seal oil does. The seal oil seals it because if the air has contact with the berries, you'll have what? Moldy berries, because the mold is in the air. It protects it from the air. The other thing it does is vitamin C will not go into oil. It will not. It'll stay right in the berries. So when you scoop the berries out of the seal oil and you're going to serve it, because we add seal oil to everything anyway, and then serve it, the vitamin C is very intact in the way they used to do this. Another B vitamin that you hear about for pregnant mothers is folate. It's a vitamin B. It has a transport system that helps whenever you hear the word transport, it means it helps to transport vitamins, it helps to transport various things. And in the native foods, you find it in, guess what? Liver. That's all right. If you don't like liver, you can eat trout. Isn't that sound good? Seagull eggs, duck eggs, Hudson Bay tea. So a nice hot cup of Hudson Bay tea, you'll be getting this vitamin B that you need. And you don't really need a lot of it. Potassium, and you hear about potassium from diabetics, or if you're sick with a stomach flu and you throw up, the chances are the doctor will prescribe for you some potassium pills. Or they tell you to go home and eat a banana. Because what it does is it maintains the fluid in our system. And the potassium is very high, and it's a priority in the body. It's very high in our system, and it's a priority. If it has potassium anywhere, it grabs it and keeps it for future use, because it has to keep everything in balance. And that's why the doctor, first thing they check if you're diabetic and you've been throwing up, they will send you home with potassium pills. What do you have to eat to get this? Eat meat, halibut, clams, cranberries, deer meat, seagull eggs, duck eggs, dog salmon, king salmon, all the salmons, yummy. Salmon berries, and black seaweed. Somebody was asking me if herring eggs had a lot of the nutrients that we need. So I hope you're keeping track of how many times I say herring eggs. And keep track of how many times I say black seaweed. It's a race. Magnesium. It's found only in, there's only 1 ounce of this in our whole body, but we need it. It's mainly in the bone, and it's involved in muscle contraction and blood clotting. So there's several systems that has to do with this. So what do you have to eat? Fish eyes. If you don't like fish eyes, then maybe you can eat all the dark berries. Blueberries, huckleberries, black huckleberries, regular blueberries, deer meat, seagull eggs, and duck eggs. So then we go to the fruits. And the fruit, they want us to have, and we already talked about all the berries, on how many?
I said 2 to 4.
2 to 4. And we already talked about all the vitamins that are found in vegetables. So we're already meeting a lot of this. Vitamin A and vitamin C and the potassium that's found. And that's the reason, the 3 reasons that they want us to eat fruit is because of the vitamin C and the vitamin A and potassium. And I hope you remember potassium. It's quite a long list for potassium. So I think we were really good in regards to, because it's a priority in our bodies, the Tlingits really had this down, and they used a lot of potassium foods. And as long as you include liver, you're fine. Let's go to breads. I think the bread, we don't have any. We never had any. So, but it's really important for carbohydrates, something people try to avoid when they're dieting. It supplies our body with glucose, which is sugar, and it turns it into energy. The only problem with glucose is if you don't use it, it'll turn to fat. So, but this particular, those who want to use carbohydrates, it is important in energy for our brain. It keeps our brains working good. So, and the nerve cells. And I told you earlier that people who try to diet and skip breakfast, they end up like this. So, and that's what it's talking about. It gives us good, healthy nerve cells. What do you have to eat? Berries, clams, herring eggs, wild rhubarb. We were talking about wild rhubarb earlier, and I just love that. So, dried fish, seal oil, and seaweed, and Hudson Bay tea. We eat breakfast foods to get our B vitamins. That is really important to us. These water-soluble vitamins, vitamin B's and vitamin C, that can be destroyed by water. It releases energy, and it affects the skin and the eyes. So a person who needs this vitamin, you can tell the sores around the eyes could be a possibility. What do you have to eat? Salmon, flounder, clams, deer meat, seagull eggs, duck eggs, herring eggs, black seaweed, trout, and deer meat. The other things that you need, we already talked about: thiamine, niacin, iron, protein, and magnesium. And they broke it down in such a way so that you get some of it from the breads and the cereals, and some of it from the meats, and some of it from another area. So you're getting these things that you need by eating a lot of different foods. So we'll go to the last one, which is milk. When I gave a talk like this before, somebody approached me and said, "Why didn't you guys milk the mountain goats?" My dad fell off the mountain trying to shoot one. You know how we could milk one? So hold still, will you? Milk is important for the teeth, the bones, and it's a very important nutrient that we need. 99% of the calcium that we have is in the bones, and everybody knows that. And then the calcium is banked in the bones and in the teeth. And it looks like when you look at this scientifically, phosphorus is very important. We talked about phosphorus, like when you're in a boat and you see the green in the water. The phosphorus is very important in order for us to accept the calcium from the milk. So, and this is the interesting thing about calcium, and I want to go into this before I tell you what you need to eat to get this. is if you have somebody that drinks like 6, 7, 8 glasses of milk a day, what happens to their system is they have so much calcium that it is expelled from what they don't use, is expelled from their system. But if you don't have if you don't drink a lot of milk, and we didn't have any traditionally, we didn't have a cup of milk that you could drink. The interesting thing about the body is it takes every little scrap of calcium that it could get from everywhere that it could get it, because your body needs it. When the white man first came, what they found was there were very tall Tlingit people. So we were doing something right. What do you have to eat? Small fish, fresh herring, fried, whole. Berries, deer stomach, gumboots, shellfish, herring eggs, fish head stew. Boiled fish with all the bones. And this is one thing that we kind of bought into it as new young Tlingits or Southeast people, is that the stores sell boneless meat. It's packaged, so it's this big sign on it that says boneless. And I heard a lot of women say, well, I'm not going to pay for bones. So the store has picked up on that, and so they take all the bones out, leave the meat for you to buy, and they sell the bones to who? Do you know? Dog food companies. So the dogs are getting all the calcium. I think we're thinking that way too. I've watched young men who butchered a deer and the bones are left. We never did that, never. We would cut the meat away and then cut up all the bones and cook it. Oh my, what a feast. The bone marrow is so great and so full of iron, and it is so important. When we knew that my mom was cooking these bones, we would go out and they would say, dinner's ready, and we'd pick up a piece of wood. And if you know what that's for, anybody know? You take the stick and you pound the bone on there and you go boom, 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 and the marrow comes out. So we would come into the house with these sticks and push the marrow out by hitting it on the board. So we cooked all our fish and all our meat, a lot of our meat with the bones. And the interesting thing about, if you read the package on milk today, it'll say vitamin D added. And the reason they do that is because vitamin D helps to absorb the calcium that you need. And we were safe because we put seal oil in everything, and it had a lot of vitamin D in it. So it was something that was kind of a part of our upbringing, was we put to eat everything with seal oil, and that seemed to really help us. The babies were the only ones that had mother's milk. So they had mother's milk for whatever number of years that they needed it. And this was very healthy for their diet. But they needed this vitamin D, and we didn't have much sunshine, as you can see outside. And I was really amused when I saw a picture of a baby that was sitting on a seat, and it had 2 sticks like this for a pacifier, and guess what it was sticking through? Seal fat. So the seal fat was inside the baby's mouth, just sucking away on it, and the stick was keeping it from going down. So the baby was getting vitamin D because that was the pacifier, plus any vitamin D that the mother ingested. The riboflavin and the protein that we get from calcium, that was part of the other discussion that we had already. And I know that we've been running late, so I just kind of really breezed through this. But it's been of real interest to me because of the healthy natives that we've had in southeast, the Tsimshian and the Haidas. And I limited myself to Tlingits because that's what I know about. That's the foods that I know, and a lot of it is similar because I saw this wonderful book put out by the Tsimshian, and it's about the kind of foods that they used, and it's all the same thing that we eat. So if you have any questions, I'm still here today, so or any comments, I appreciate comments. And I'm sorry that we really had to rush like this, but gonna cheesh for your attention.
So good morning. Thank you all for coming. My name's Edwell John Jr. and I'm from Angoon, and I was raised here in Juneau. My mom left Angoon when I was 5 years old. And I'm talking about vitamin D today. It's a really good segue from what Shirley just talked about. I'm talking about vitamin D because I have a personal interest in this and how it affects our native people. I believe, I have facts. I spoke with nurse practitioner, and I am a vitamin D deficient person. So part of sharing our knowledge today is I want to share with you the facts, and I want to share with you what I believe has happened in the past 50, 60, 70 years with our people. I'm really glad Shirley just, it's a really good segue. She really talked about what we were doing 50, 60 years ago compared to what we're doing now. And it's really puzzling. And I want you to look at this slide up here. It's really puzzling on what's happening to our people now, people that are outside of the village now, and we're not eating our traditional foods, and where that vitamin D is coming from. And I'm going to tell you how important the vitamin D is now to our people, even more so than it was 50 years ago. We were getting our vitamin D 50 years ago, and we're not getting it now. And I really hope you stay for this because it's really important for our people, and I believe it's more important now because we're not getting our traditional foods that we used to. I'd like to thank Justine Emerson. She was going to speak with me, panelist with me during this presentation, but she's not able to attend this. She is an advanced practice nurse, APN, and she's got her MSN, Master in Science in Nursing. She works at Valley Medical, and this is what happened. I was kind of worried about my muscles. I was getting weaker. And I went to Search, and I went outside of Search because I work for the state. So I asked several doctors. They did blood tests on me over and over and over. I think I've had, I can't tell you how many blood tests I had. And even at the emergency room. So they did research, they did blood tests. They couldn't figure out what's wrong with me. I said my muscles are really weak and really sore all the time. My calves were sore. And maybe some of you could relate to that now. And what was starting to puzzle me more and more is they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And my wife, she likes to get massages. I think many of you out there like to get massages. And so I could only massage her neck for maybe 15 seconds. You're probably thinking, great, 15 seconds, what good is that? It's only a few minutes. not even that. But my hands would get really sore. Really sore. I mean, I could barely open up a Diet Pepsi. I'm only 45, so it was puzzling to me why this was happening. So I went to see Justine Emerson, and she prescribed me with vitamin D. And at that time, I said, this is only recently, by the way, this is only about 3 months ago. So what had happened was I was starting to be afraid of falling down. And I said, I shouldn't be afraid of falling down. I'm only 45. I felt like if I fell down, then I would break a bone. And just recently, like I said, 3 months ago, I went to see Justine. She prescribed me with prescription vitamin D, which is 50,000 IUs per week, which is way more than what we're supposed to have. But now I'm feeling better. I feel stronger, and my muscles in my calves are feeling stronger. Let me tell you, I work downtown, so walking from the McDonald's store downtown restaurant up to maybe Key Bank was pretty hard for me. And I said, this is not right. Something's wrong. I'm not able, I don't have the strength I used to have when I was 10 years ago. So I went to see her. She prescribed me, and 3 months later, I'm feeling much, much better. So I did some research on this. And as I was doing the research, I asked Justine if she could come speak on behalf of this. She has done extensive research. This slideshow presentation is from Justine. It's not mine. Just keep in mind, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. I'm not in the medical field. I'm just a person that was vitamin D deficient, and I did a lot of research. I am an instructor by trade, so I've done extensive research also. But what you're seeing in this presentation, it's 94 slides. I'm only going to show you about 50. And some of the slides are going to go pretty fast. And I just want to relate this lack of vitamin D to what's happened to our people in the past 50 years. And it's really puzzling to me. Now here, let me give you a background. I'm from Angoon. I mentioned that. If you go to Angoon now, and you look at our people, think of some of the things, and my wife pointed this out to me when I went back to Angoon. She said, wow, there's a lot of people that have arthritis. And I said, yeah, I guess after a while you start to get complacent and you don't see it. But then she reminded me, there's a lot of people that have arthritis. I said, yeah, that's true. That was one indicator of why, lack of vitamin D. And I'm going to go into several pieces this morning on what has happened in the last 50 years. Well, what has happened? Here's my thoughts. My dad used to go fishing all the time. He's a fisherman in Angoon. Where was he? He was out on the boat. He was absorbing a lot of sunlight. That's a primary source of vitamin D. What about my mom? What was she doing? She was cleaning fish. She was out on the shore. She was getting cockles. She was cleaning, helping with the deer when my dad came back from fishing. What's happening now? How many of you are outside cleaning fish? How many of you are outside cleaning deer? How many of you are actually out fishing? Shirley talked about all the foods that we receive now from all the vitamins and minerals and proteins that we receive from our traditional foods. That's not happening now. So with all that, we're getting a serious vitamin D deficiency. And this is the presentation. First of all, we live in Juneau, right? And when we live in Juneau, guess what? You probably recognize this place. Where are we most of the time? We're inside. We're not getting that vitamin D that we should be getting. And a good place to get vitamin D, warm, sunny places. Arizona. Where are we when we go to work? We're inside. We're not receiving sunlight. Where are we when we're working? We're inside. There's no sunlight, right? This is our primary source of vitamin D. We're in our cubicle. Where are we when we're going home? And what's happening? I've heard over and over and over, it's dark when we go to work, and it's dark when we go home. So there's no vitamin D there either, right? Again, I just want to remind you, this is not my slide presentation. I'm adding to her notes. This is Justine's. We live in a place where there's very, very little sunlight. We know that. And later on, I'm going to give you my input on, why the northern areas probably are not vitamin D deficient. So why is it important? What are some of the major functions of vitamin D? It supports our absorption, metabolism, phosphorus, normal cell differentiation and proliferation, cancer prevention. I'm going to talk about that too. Promotes insulin sensitivity and blood sugar, right? Diabetes prevention. Now you're going to start to hear some of these words that you're going to start to think about your people, right? Here's what I thought. I said there has to be a common denominator for our people. What's going on? We got diabetes. We have cancer. I can't count how many people have cancer with our people. We have obesity, right? There's so many things that are happening. I said, what has changed? Why are so many of our people having these problems? It also regulates over 200 genes through binding vitamin D receptors throughout the body. Cancer. Unfortunately, one of my cousins just passed away yesterday from cancer, stomach cancer. I can't even tell you how many people I know that have cancer. Right? Low vitamin D increases your risks of cancer. This is not my slide. Breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer. My dad has prostate cancer. My uncle has prostate cancer. Lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer, esophageal cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma. Okay, I'm not a nurse or a doctor, so excuse me if I can't pronounce some of these words correctly. And that's why I was hoping that Justine would have been here. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, bladder cancer, uterine cancer. Isn't this amazing? I'm hoping that I am able to get the word out that how important vitamin D is to our people. And I did some research online too, and this is not in the slide, this is just from my research. The majority of the people that are lacking vitamin D are darker skinned people, right? And that's online. You could look that up too. What are we? We're darker skinned people, right? So we're susceptible to vitamin D deficiencies. How it helps? How does vitamin D help? We have all the cancerous cells in our body. Vitamin D helps cells to develop and differentiate normally. It could kill off some cancer cells. Shirley talked about all the foods, and we get all the vitamins and minerals. We're not getting that now. We're not getting as much as we used to. Right? This all kind of ties together. I'm hoping this is bringing the picture together for you on how important this one particular vitamin is. I believe it's one of the common denominators for our people that's causing, I don't want to make too many claims, but I believe, this is just my own personal belief, that the lack of this particular vitamin is playing a domino effect for the rest of what, just a couple of slides I've shown you already, that's causing our people to have such problems. That can inhibit proliferation in cancer cells, right? Autoimmune diseases. I have psoriasis. And I'm pretty sure you know someone who has psoriasis. So it affects with grave disease, thyroid. Well, how this whole thing started off was I had to go to the emergency room. They diagnosed me and I have a thyroid problem. So they prescribed me with thyroid medicine. At that time, I'm not sure what happened, but at that same time is when my calves got incredibly weak, and I got weak. And they said, oh, it's the thyroid, because the thyroid regulates your whole system and you get energy and you could, walk around and work out. But I couldn't. After I got my thyroid medicine, I felt better, but I wasn't as strong as I used to be. And I said, well, maybe it's old age. I'm getting a little bit older now. And I said, yeah, it probably attributes to that. I went to see the doctor so many times and saying, how come I'm weak now? How come I don't have energy? There's a picture of someone who has thyroid. Here's psoriasis, type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis. My wife was puzzled. My mom has it really bad. She passed away last month. She had rheumatoid arthritis so bad. My auntie has rheumatoid arthritis. My dad has crippling rheumatoid arthritis. My sister is starting to get rheumatoid arthritis. She's 35. And my wife was puzzled. Said, why do they have arthritis? How come so many people have arthritis? I believe vitamin D has a part in that. That's just my belief in our people. Multiple sclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease, lupus. My mom was diagnosed with lupus too, right? Vitamin D helps prevent hypertension. I mean, people you know that are very tense. Helps prevent tuberculosis. My mom had tuberculosis too. Osteoporosis. Falls. I mentioned earlier I was afraid to fall. I'm not anymore. This has only been 90 days now. I'm not going to fall down on demonstration though and see if I could break a bone. I'm not going to do that. But I feel better now. Weakness. I feel a lot stronger now with my vitamin D prescription. I'm able to walk faster, walk harder. I'm able to work out now. So it plays an important part. Heart disease. I'm pretty sure if I were to ask how many of you are affected or have a family member that has been affected with heart disease, I'm pretty sure I would see a lot of people raising their hand. Type 2 diabetes. My doctor told me I'm type 1. I'm hoping to reverse this with vitamin D. Adequate vitamin D helps with depression, with seasonal affective disorder, otherwise known as SAD, resistance to pneumonia, prevents colds and flus. I feel better. When I was in the military, I was in Savannah, Georgia, I was in New York, New Jersey. I think I received adequate sunlight. But when I came up here, I seemed to start having health problems. This is just a coincidence, maybe, maybe not. I was incredibly healthy. I got sick in the Army maybe once every 4 or 5 years. When I first moved back here, I seemed like I got sick every year. Prevents the progression of arthritis. Very important part. I mean, I am encouraging every single one of you to get checked out with vitamin D. They're finding this, how this relates to people more and more, but more so because this is our Tlingit people, more so with Tlingit because we're darker skinned people. We're more susceptible. We're not eating all the foods, as Shirley talked about. Not all of us. Booster your immune system. How many of you know someone who's gets sick a lot or gets sick really easy? I don't remember my grandma and grandpa getting sick. I really don't, until they got older. I don't remember many of our elders getting sick a lot until they got older, until they stopped having all the traditional foods. But I'd be curious to know. Wounds heal. When you're younger, you heal faster. And as you get older, you have less and less of that vitamin D. Maybe you're the type of person that gets a cut and it takes a week to heal. Check your vitamin D. Preeclampsia. C-sections. Here are some intriguing possibilities. Vitamin D helps suppress spontaneous food intake and burn fat, which leads to obesity, right? So this lack of vitamin D, if you're taking enough, then you're not going to all of a sudden get hungry. And then also you're able to burn fat quicker. It helps with memory decline, cognition, by its neuroprotective effects. What about children? Like I said, when I was growing up, I was always outside. Guess what's happening with our children now? Including my stepdaughter right now. She's so intrigued with games. Where is she? She's inside. She's watching TV. When I was growing up in Angoon, I was outside all the time. Matter of fact, sometimes, and you can even ask my dad, I'd come home at 11 o'clock at night, and it was still light out in summertime, right? What's happening now? Well, for children, you have an increased type 1 diabetes. Infants given 2,000 IUs of vitamin D a day starting their first year of life had an 80% reduced risk of being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And studies have found a significant relationship between maternal vitamin D, insufficiency in asthma, less dense bones, which means it could break easier, increased fracture, smaller heads and poor teeth in children. Right? Factors affecting vitamin D production. Time of year. Again, let's go back to what happened 50, 60 years ago. Where was my dad? Where was my mom? Outside. Where are they now? Inside. Right? Our latitude. Where are we? We're in a city, in a region now, where we have a lot of cloud cover, very little sun. Right? Here's I think that's Mount Roberts right there. Clothing. We don't have to worry about that. Your skin absorbs the vitamin D. What are we, most of us are using all the time? Big coats, hoods, hats. Right? So we're not absorbing that vitamin D that comes through. I don't think we need to worry too much about sunblock. That's not my slide. But where are we? We're up here in the northern areas. Now, I talked to Justine, and she did some studies. This is not on the slide. And I said, well, what about the people up north? Fairbanks, Barrow, so forth, right? Aren't they in the dark most of the time? Yes, they are in the dark most of the year, but they're also in the light most of the year. What's the difference between up north and down here? Up north, they actually have summers. Down here, when was the last time we actually had a full-blown summer? I think it was 2004. Remember that? Oh, that was amazing. Everybody got their hits of vitamin D that year. And I have a funny story. I heard some people that came up here, tourists, and they saw how beautiful it was and how sunny it was. I think it was sunny from March until October. I think very few days with cloud cover, very few days with rain, and I was just amazed. I was amazed. And the tourists were just eating that up. And this is what I think happened. Well, I heard one person saying that they knew somebody who came up here as a tourist, loved it so much, bought land and a house, decided to move here and stay here. They did move here. They stayed here. And I could hear some chuckling. You know what happened a year later? They moved out. They said, wait, this is not the sunny, nice place that I signed up for. It's cloudy. It's rainy. That's part of how we live here. Sometimes we get sun. Sources of vitamin D. Well, Shirley talked a lot about this, but guess where we received the majority of our vitamin D 50 years ago? We ate salmon, lunch and dinner. We ate deer all the time. We had, guess where else you get it? Oils. What did we have? Shirley talked about it, fish oils. So what's happening now with our vitamin D intake as Tlingit people? Virtually non-existent. What does that lead to? This is my thoughts now. I'm going to get away from what the slide is. My thoughts, my spin on the whole thing. Our vitamin D deficiency in our people is related, I think, to our arthritis, our bone structure, our growth, how strong we are. I don't want to say this is a bad thing, but I was over at the tournament, basketball tournament. I don't mean no disrespect. I was at the basketball tournament in Edgecombe. And when I saw our boys come on the basketball court, they were pretty skinny, right? And then I saw the boys from the non-native villages come out. They were pretty buff. They were muscular, right? Think about that, right? We received it from eggs. Shirley talked extensively about herring because I'm getting hungry right now. Where's our primary source of vitamin D? Milk. Now, I've gone to more than a few places, and majority of my family's from Angoon. And guess what? I don't want to make a generalized statement, but just from what I saw. When I was there in the villages, how much is milk? Very, very expensive. Guess what? How much is Kool-Aid? $1. Guess what? What I saw, from what I saw. What did most of the mothers feed their children? Kool-Aid. And lately, pop. And now, into the teenage years, those energy drinks. Right? So, what's the difference between 50 years ago and today? 50 years ago, we had fish oils, we had deer meat, we had salmon all the time. What do we have now? Processed food and no milk and no vitamin D. Shirley mentioned that a long time ago we had tall people and big muscular people. You could look at all of those pictures from a long time ago. This is my spin. You see how big they were? How muscular, how strong they were? Even now, you could look at some of our elder men that are still with us. You could see they have thick bones. They're big. Okay, think about that. That's all I'm doing. I'm presenting the material and then hoping to get somebody out there thinking about that and maybe do a study on this and get all of our people tested. Because how important it is. I think it's very important. Risk factors. There are a lot of risks if you have a vitamin D deficiency. This has happened to me. Well, first of all, there's little sun exposure. We're in the northern latitude. Obesity. Now, this is kind of hard for us. It's kind of hard for me. We have, and you saw that menu, we have so much good food. It is hard to not eat the good food. You gain weight. It's like Thanksgiving every day. We eat all these foods, and many of the foods are fatty foods. But what had happened, we needed that energy 50 years ago. Why? Because my mom was working in a cannery. She was working on the beaches. Where's my dad? He needed that fatty energy to go hunting, to go fishing, to get a seal. All of that was necessary. But if we don't have all those foods and we're sitting in the office, then you start to gain weight. Kidney disease, that's a risk factor. Chronic liver disease, fat malabsorption, Celtic, cystic fibrosis, right? Those are all parts of it. Blood levels. When I first got mine tested, I was tested at 24. Insufficiency. Where are you supposed to be at? Between 54 and 90. That's in normal sunny countries. Guess what? We're not in a normal sunny country. And we're not eating all the foods that we used to eat. Blood testing costs about $160 to $230. Hopefully, insurance could take care of that. Maybe Search. I'm not sure if Search is doing vitamin D testing. I think it should be done. It's quite expensive. It's slowly moving towards being covered for screening. Okay. It's funny. I work for the state, and our state doctor, I approached him. I called him about this and told him what my thoughts were, and he agreed. And just a little while ago, we had a health fair, state health fair, and they offered vitamin D testing. I wish I would have had this presentation before then, and they offered it for $60, right? But, I'm encouraging you to get tested. How can we get vitamin D? Well, milk, sunshine. We can't get the sunshine here. milk's expensive in our villages. Well, they have supplements. I was prescribed 50,000 IUs a week, which is pretty high. But they sell this over, at the stores here, local stores, 1,000 IUs, and that is a really good supplement. Recommendations from Justine: get your vitamin D level checked if you can. If low, discuss high dose short term, like I did, vitamin D, and ask your health and do a follow-up. I'm scheduled for a follow-up within the next month or so. I'm curious on where my vitamin D level is. I feel better, but I want to get it checked out. Get it rechecked several months after you finish taking your supplements. And right now, just out of curiosity, my auntie's, she was feeling weak, and her hands were cold all the time. How many of you have cold hands? It was cold. If you come feel my hands, if you shake my hand, it's pretty warm. And she said, hey, your hands are warm. My mom told me that too. I said, well, now I have vitamin D in me. It's helping. It's just amazing how this one lack of one vitamin for me affected me in this way. And that's why I'm here, to hopefully get the word out and get you excited about, maybe there's something happening with my body that I need to get fixed or get checked up on. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, but I'm just trying to spread the word out and maybe get you thinking about what has happened 50 years ago compared to what's happening now. Why am I weak? Why are there so many people with arthritis? Why is there diabetes? Why is there so much obesity within our people? I'm just puzzled by that, and that's what sparked this presentation. Or you could take a vacation. You could go to Hawaii, Mexico, and it says somewhere sunny. Every 2 months, do a little sunscreen. And I don't think we're going to get it here. Hopefully this summer, cross your fingers, we'll have a nice sunny summer this year and get your vitamin D intake. And the recommendations here this is recommendations from Justine Emerson that you should visit. If you have a paper and pencil, you should write it down. Or just research it online. Go to Google, type in, vitamin D deficiency. You'll be surprised at how it affects our people, darker skinned people. How much. My wife got hers checked out. She's okay. Now, this is kind of funny. A little funny story. When I first went over to my in-laws to eat dinner, I call my in-laws fancy dinners. They have all these fancy dinners. I'm a meat and potatoes type of person, fish, meat. And I went there, and they have their well-balanced diet, right? And like Shirley said earlier, we had a well-balanced diet. Our diet is not well-balanced anymore. It's off-center. That's just my personal opinion, right? And I think helping to get us back on center, one of the ways is by having more vitamin D, get you thinking about how it's affecting your family. Diabetes, cancers, prostate, colon, breast cancers, muscle weakness, cold hands, weak muscles, weak bones. I'm telling you that describes a lot of my family members right now. And when this clan conference came out, I talked to Steve Hendricks, and I said, I'd like to talk about this, even if I'm talking to two people. I want to get the word out, and hopefully the right person will hear it. Hopefully it'll spark an interest in our medical community, in our people, and hopefully we could start getting some tests. I'd like to thank Justine Emerson again. This slideshow presentation is from Justine Emerson. I looked at a lot of the notes, and again, I want to give her the credit. This is her research, not mine. I just wanted to put a little spin on it and get you thinking about how vitamin D affects you and how it affects your family members and your friends, and hopefully to encourage you to get that vitamin D levels checked out in yourself or your family members. I'd like to thank everybody for listening to me this morning. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Tlingit hinach setan tla yuchat duasak. Tleitka hinach libi watanabe yuchat duasak. Yech na chatsati. Tlukna sha ayachat. Deki na yadi na chatsati. Dakloedi dashkhan na chatsati. Kagwantan dashkhan na chatsati. Tluka hari dashkhan na chatsati. Yak dot kwan nachatsati, digana hitan ayachat. What I've just told you was my Tlingit name, Seton Tla. My English name is Libby Watanabe. We are Yeth or Raven Moiety, Tlukna Shah, women of the Tlukna Hadi or Koho clan. I also told you my lineage on my father's side. And I want to first and foremost recognize my mother, Gerry Williams, Yeth Jini Tla, and acknowledge her for all the food gathering that she taught us, and as well as my husband Clint, the late Keat, and my sisters Barbara Fujimoto and Gail Dabalaz. Thank you for all your help. I believe Gail has distributed a packet of brochures, and those are sort of my slideshow in a nutshell. So you don't have a copy of the slideshow itself, but the information that I use in the slideshow is in the brochures that have been distributed. And also my sister Barbara is distributing raffle tickets. I've got 2 copies of the traditional food guide that was produced by the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium to give away, as well as 2 copies of Pauline Duncan's Tlingit Recipes of Today and Long Ago cookbooks for people that stay here through the end of the presentation. So that's your reward. And I have 26 slides, so I think we'll get through them pretty quickly and be able to move on to our moderator and hopefully catch up some of our time. So I'm going to sit down so I can go through my slideshow, and I want to thank you all for being here. I just introduced myself, so I will just move along here. Today, this afternoon, I wanted to cover native foods, a little bit about sanitation. I also wanted to cover some of the traditional food harvesting as well as safe food preservation. So one of the brochures will cover safe pressure canning, and then we'll wrap it up and have the drawings, and I have a slide that lists the references that I've used to draw upon. Just by way of a brief introduction, I initially became interested in native foods while growing up in Juneau and later living in Sitka. And again, our mother, Gerry Williams, in the photo with my son, Justine, taught us everything we know about how to hunt, fish, harvest, and preserve our native foods as a way to stay healthy. And that background really narrowed my career path to where I became a registered and licensed dietitian, and I'm one of just a handful of Alaska Native dietitians throughout the state of Alaska. So it really is a love and a healthy way of life. Alaska Natives and Alaskan residents throughout Alaska eat many of the same native foods, and we've heard Edwell as well as Shirley talk about a lot of our different native foods as well as their nutrient content. So we have salmon, venison, caribou or moose meat, shellfish and seal, wild greens including goose tongue and beach asparagus, wild berries. And while many of us eat these foods on a daily basis, some of us are limited by their availability. And the photo is, again, my son Justine holding a rather large king salmon. And the top photo is a cooler of sockeye salmon, which we as a whole extended family fish and preserve every single summer. and that's what we use to live upon throughout the rest of the year. Our native foods from throughout Alaska have many things in common. They enrich our lives when we consume them because they satisfy us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And they increase our physical activity levels when we hunt, fish, or gather them. This improves our overall health and quality of life. Wild game, fish, and shellfish are very healthy and low in saturated fat and packed with nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and fiber. I call our native foods the original health foods because even before we researched them and knew of their nutrient content, which you'll see listed in the table in one of the brochures you've been provided, we just knew that they were extremely healthy. And they also, when we gather our native foods, they allow us to utilize the land we live on and conserve our natural resources when harvesting them conservatively. The photo is my husband Clint and our son Justin dip netting for sockeye at Redoubt Bay in Sitka. Sanitation, I believe, is extremely important and the key to preserving wholesome, healthy local foods. Something as simple as washing your hands often with soap and water when working on local foods can increase the content and the quality of the foods. Liquid hand sanitizers are a good substitute if there's no running water available, and washing your knives and cutting boards in soapy water and sanitizing them with bleach, and just a tablespoon of bleach per gallon of water can sanitize your foods and really make a difference between the quality of the harvested food, especially when you go to enjoy that food later on. The photo is a large bowl of freshly picked beach asparagus from Sitka. And I believe those are listed in the table in the brochure that you've been provided. Beach asparagus is very high in vitamin A. Some other helpful hints for the sanitation, using acrylic, plastic, or solid wood cutting boards, keeping your knives sharp, that's really important, and it also helps prevent injuries and increases the safety. You don't want to cut yourself while you're working on native foods because that's always stressful. You can bring a portable knife sharpener with you and use one cutting board for meat and another for plant foods to prevent cross-contamination. Storing foods on ice or in the refrigerator until consumed or processed is really good. And again, that goes to really taking good care of our local foods because they're so precious, and respecting the resource by just preserving them well from the very start. So storing them on ice just increases the quality of the food. And you want high quality foods when you go to enjoy the food. So starting with the very first step after you harvest, the seafood or the animal, just preserve it on ice. That would be a really good way to begin the safe food processing. In the photo is a photo of some of the beautiful salmon berries from Sitka. Some other helpful hints: handling fish, game, or plants carefully to preserve their high nutrient content, cleaning and gutting the fish or game immediately, and again, packing the fish and game on ice until it's ready to use. Sometimes you hear stories about all these foods that are gathered and then they weren't stored properly, so they would spoil and you have to toss out boatloads of fish or herring eggs, and it just makes you want to cry. So just planning a little bit ahead of time to make sure that doesn't happen is really important. And then storing the fresh fish and game up to 2 days. So again, not keep it in the back of the truck for days on end in the summertime so that it spoils. And that will also maintain the maximum freshness and the nutrients. The photo is a variety of seafood, including salmon and lobster. So again, besides being very healthy foods, consuming our local foods helps decrease the risk for certain diseases like diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, and digestive challenges. In the photo is a photo of Sitka spruce tips that we gathered to make the spruce tip jelly that's in the lower photo. And my mom and I have traveled a couple of summers in a row to the Skagway Traditional Council's Traditional Plant Forum. So if nobody's ever been to that, it's a wonderful gathering where people come together and celebrate and share about our local traditional plants. So this table is a very busy table, but I just wanted to just introduce it to you. It's in the middle page of the traditional foods brochure that you've been provided. And this too reinforces what Edwell and Shirley have talked about as far as the high nutrient content of our local foods. You can just see across the board that even if some of the foods, for example, salmon berries, aren't particularly high in any one vitamin or mineral, they do have a decent amount of vitamin A, but they're low in fat, and they're very healthy, and they have fiber and a high water content. So consuming more of those foods rather than store-bought, highly processed foods just gives you a healthy food to consume rather than an unhealthy food. So that's pretty much the bottom line for this slide is our local foods are extremely, extremely healthy, and when you get out and gather them, you're being physically active, you're interacting with your family, you're enjoying our land and resources, and they're just extremely healthy foods. That's the bottom line, the message I wanted to get across with that slide. Lactose intolerance is pretty common in our native people, and lactose is actually the sugar in milk and milk products. Dairy products are a really good source of calcium, and calcium is important for strong bones and teeth. So if you can't drink milk, you still need 1,000 milligrams of calcium every day. So just try to factor that in other ways. Yogurt provides 400 milligrams of calcium per cup. Sockeye salmon that's canned with the bones adds 75 milligrams of calcium per 3-ounce serving. And when you're working on the salmon, if you just cut through the smaller salmon species and pack the salmon in the jar and process it, when you go to use that food, you just crush up the bones, and that adds additional calcium. And that's a really good use of the resources that our mom taught us. And you have less waste to deal with, so you're utilizing more of the salmon. If you haven't guessed, my mom is the star of my presentations. She taught us everything we know. And then also calcium fortified orange juice like Minute Maid can be a good source of calcium. And if all else fails, just get that 1,000 milligrams of calcium in a calcium supplement, because if you don't, your body will actually start robbing your bones and teeth and thinning out your bones and teeth for the calcium that your muscles and nerves need every single day. And that can lead to osteoporosis, and you don't want that. So how many of you think that you consume enough calcium every day? Show of hands. Couple people. Okay, so the rest of you have your homework. And you don't count, honey. I know you don't get enough calcium every day. 1,000 milligrams, that's the goal, okay? Every single day. Water. I like to talk about water because I believe it's the lost nutrient. We need so much of it every single day, 8 to 10 cups of water a day. And again, when you drink water, you're not drinking Rockstar, you're not drinking Jolt, you're not drinking these, 180, these beverages that are so unhealthy. So just try to get the 8 to 10 cups of water. That can include fruit juice, water, herbal tea, and brothy soups. And sometimes when you think you're hungry, you're actually thirsty. So maybe try to have some herbal tea or something and see if that works. Also for survival purposes, if you need to purify water out in the woods, you can put 2 drops of bleach in a quart of clear water, or 4 drops of bleach in a quart of cloudy water, and that will make that water safe to drink. And then you just stir it up really well. And if you're out in the woods and need that to survive, then definitely try that. On to pressure canning. I have a whole separate brochure for pressure canning. A lot of people still do the water bath canning, but definitely pressure canning is the safest way to home can seafood or wild game foods. So that's the protein foods that we've been talking about. Salmon, venison, moose meat, caribou, elk. Any of the seafood, the protein foods, you really need to pressure can that to safely can it. And the reason for that is those are low acid foods, and the pressure canning reduces the risk for botulism by increasing the temperature of the foods high enough to kill the botulism spores. It's only the pressure canning that can do that. Water bath canning cannot do that, and so we know of people that have water bath can and they're fine, but if you want to be the absolute safest, definitely try to pressure can your protein foods, and that can reduce the risk for botulism food poisoning. So preparing the canning jars and lids, just wash the jars in warm soapy water and rinse and allow them to dry. Prepare the lids according to the manufacturer's directions, and just inspect the jars, the lids and the rings, and just toss out dented, chipped, or broken items. It's just not worth it to put your precious food in there and then have it come out broken or not totally safe. And just use the self-sealing lids. It's the two-piece lids, the actual flat lid and the ring for the canning. You can't reuse the flat lids. Just the rings, the twist rings, those are the only things that are reusable. And the photo is my sister Annie, Foria, and my son Justin with a whole pile of freshly canned sockeye. That's after a lot of work. So on with preparing and packing the fish or game. Just cut the fish or game to size using your jars as a guide. The top photo, you want to leave about 1 inch of what we call head space in the top of the jar. So between the top of the food and the top of the jar, you want about 1 inch, just so your food can process properly in the pressure canner. And just cut through the fish bones for the smaller fish species and pack them into the jar for extra calcium. Again, they crush easily after the canning process, and they mix in well with whatever you're preparing. If you're using the pint or half pint size jars for fish or game, those are the most common. Quart size jars can be used, but they require a longer processing time, and we'll go into that in one of the next slides. And in the photo is a quart size jar. And that's a lot of fish. We've only used those for parties. Otherwise, if it's just one person, sometimes even half a pint can be a lot. It just depends on how hungry you are. So that's canning smoked sockeye and Sitka on the lower photo. After you've packed the jars, just use a clean cloth to wipe down the top of the jars so that that flat lid can seal firmly onto the jar, and that's actually the food preservation process. And then just cover the jars and screw on those ring lids, just finger tight, not too tight. One time we had a fisherman friend helping us, and he tightened my mom's canning jars so tight that they didn't process properly in the canner, so she had to reprocess them because those jars were just screwed on so tight. He didn't realize his own strength, and you just want to screw them on finger tight so that they can process well. And then, if the lids are on there too loose, then the fluids will escape from the jar. So just right is perfect. The bottom photo is smoking coho salmon in Sitka. And preparing the pressure canner. You're going to add about 2 or 3 inches of water to the canner and place a rack in the bottom of the canner, and then load the jars onto the canner. So the top photo is, the top clip art is describing that process. And then you place the lid on the canner with the vent open, and then tighten down the locks on the lid of the canner and turn on the heat to the highest setting. And then the steaming and the venting process begins. And when the steam escapes from the vent in a steady stream, that's what you call venting the canner, and it actually prepares the canner for processing. So that takes about 10 minutes. That actually allows the air to be removed from the canner so that the temperature is the same throughout the whole canner, and that's an important step. And I love this photo. The bottom photo is my family hard at work, working on, canning the smoked sockeye salmon in Sitka. So then you're going to close the vent after the venting process has occurred and allow the pressure to increase. For the dial gauge canners, you want to reach 11 pounds of pressure, and then you begin timing for 100 minutes if pint or half pint size jars are used. For the weighted gauge canners, the one where you just plop the weighted gauge onto the vent, then you place it on the 10-pound portion of the gauge. And then when that weighted gauge starts rocking gently 2 to 3 times a minute, that's the proper pressure, and you begin timing for 100 minutes for the pint and half pint size jars. For the quart size jars, it's a lot more time. you begin timing for 160 minutes when that occurs, so 2 hours and 40 minutes. So then you just monitor. This is the part of the canning that I call you babysit the canner, because you really want to keep an eye on that and keep the pressure at 11 pounds of pressure. If the pressure drops below 11 pounds, you increase the heat back up to 11 pounds, then you have to restart the whole process. And again, that's to kill the botulism spores. It has to be that steady, consistent time. And then for the pint or half pint size jars at 100 minutes, or for the quart size jars 160 minutes, then you turn off the heat and allow the pressure to drop down to 0 naturally. People that try to cool down their canner quicker, that's not the safest thing to do, and you definitely want to be safe. So just by that time you're usually exhausted, just turn it off and unload the canner in the morning. That's usually what we end up doing. And then you remove the jars using a jar lifter. And again, that's for safety, because those jars are still hot and bubbling and just boiling. So then you place the jars on a clean cloth or newspaper to cool. And there's a photo of myself and our son Justine with that beautiful canned sake. So now this part is also important. You cool the jars, and you don't want to handle them for about 12 hours. The lids are still forming a seal, and you'll hear a popping sound. Maybe that'll occur immediately for some of the jars, but it may take a while for some of the other jars. So that seal is really important. That's actually the food preservation process. And then you don't want to tighten the bands while the jars are cooling, because again, the seal is still forming. When the jars are cool, you can check the seal. It should have a downward curve. When you press on that lid, it shouldn't pop down. It should just be a concave curve, and you can press on it and it won't pop or anything. And then just check the jars for signs of leakage, and wipe down the jars and label them with the contents and the date. People always ask, how long is the canned food good for? And usually you want to consume those foods within 1 to 3 years. It'll still be okay beyond that time, but the quality of the food begins to deteriorate, and you just want to have that food when it's nice, good quality, and you can still see what that food is. You don't want to have that 10-year-old jar of food that you're wondering, what is this, and is it safe? So just try to enjoy your foods within a 1 to 3 year time frame. Care of the pressure canner. The Cooperative Extension Service is a great service to use. If you send in your lid, they will test the dial gauge canners, and it's recommended that you do that annually. And then, again, that's so that you're preserving your food safely. The weighted gauge canners don't need to be tested annually, but just inspect them, make sure all the parts are in working order, and that the gaskets and the rubber safety plugs are not cracked or broken, and just replace the canner parts when needed. Most hardware stores carry these parts, and I always try to have extras on hand, because if you're canning at 3 in the morning and something goes out, you don't want to have to stop and stop the whole process and refrigerate your canned food because your canner's not working properly. So that's usually a good idea to have those items on hand. So putting it all together, we heard some of this with Shirley and Edwell's talk, and just some guidelines to think about. Just eating less sugar, less refined foods, drinking healthy beverages like water, herbal tea, low-fat milk and fruit juice. Hunting, fishing, and traditional food gathering are an excellent way to stay healthy and perpetuate traditional values and practices. Consuming a nutritious diet rich in local and Alaskan native foods can help you stay healthy, and it teaches your children how to live a healthy life. My mother's a perfect example. She taught all 7 of her children and her in-laws that were handy how to do that, and it's really a wonderful way to spend your time and utilize your natural resources. And again, local foods are packed with nutrients, they're readily available, and they replace less nutritious foods that may be high in fats, sugar, and refined carbohydrates. So increase your consumption of healthy local foods. We're very, very fortunate to have those wonderful foods available year-round. So again, this is reiterating what I've just said, and The Cooperative Extension Service, again, is a great resource for any of these canning foods. They've got plant canning guidelines, the protein food canning guidelines. I utilize them as a resource to stay up on the canning guidelines, and they're just a wealth of information. They have a lot of good information on their website, so I've listed the website there. If you do a search, you can find them, and most of their handouts are really easy to print if you have a printer attached to your computer. So, Gunashtish, I've enjoyed having you folks. I appreciate your attention. And the final photo is myself, Dolly Garza, and Russ Jones fishing near Readout. So, and my references, very important.
I realize it's lunchtime, but there is one more presentation left. But if people go to lunch, feel free, because it's going to be it's going to run into starting the next time if you don't. So my presentation is Land Use: A History Unfolds from Soil to Food, and it's a revitalization of resilient sustenance strategies that are going on today with Alaskan planters. The first slide I start with is a glacier to make people realize that this is the reason a lot of people don't understand that we do have gardens, and that the Tlingit people have over a 200-year-old history of gardening in Southeast Alaska. This is a flyover of Yakutat, and you can see how fast that vegetation and growth is moving in on the soils. And then on the other side, it shows that soil building up that would already be getting ready to produce vegetation. So what really set the scene for gardens and horticulture and agriculture of the Tlingit people was tobacco. Tobacco was probably here before the Europeans, because in 1787 a plant was collected by Archibal Menzies, and he felt that it looked like tobacco, was a tobacco-like looking plant. So he collected it, and it's still in the museum today in British Columbia. And in 1970, Nancy Turner went and looked at that plant and said it's definitively tobacco. And Menzies mentioned how he had seen these European gardens as he was coming up. And you could read these in some of the books that the early Spanish explorers wrote. And this is a tobacco plant. Tobacco wasn't smoked in the Southeast Alaska area. It was chewed, and it was mixed with crushed lime. And one of the reasons for this is that if you study that same method in other countries, it was an appetite suppressant. So if you're going in your canoe, if you're going somewhere and you don't want to take a lot of time to stop and eat, you're going to be, because you're working on tides and weather, you might want an appetite suppressant. And this is one of the first gardens. This was in Glacier Bay. At a certain time, this garden was on the beach. A lot of people say I'm a bad gardener today. Well, that's because they're planting potatoes and things in flat soil in your kind of muddy back lot. But the Tlingit people had their gardens on islands and sunny southern facing beach at the top vegetation level of the beach. So they were getting the benefit of that drainage, and also the slope holds more heat. So this garden is now 40 feet into the woods, although it used to be on the beachfront. But because in Glacier Bay, the glacial, because as the glacier was receding, the land popped up. It pops up like a sponge after the weight of the glacier is off of it. And these trees we cord are about 80 years old. So this was an active garden until about 1915. And here's another example of why people don't realize how much gardening was going on here a couple hundred years ago, because people didn't see the barns, or didn't see the big fields, or where would you plant things. There's not big stretches of land. And so this other garden, that's the Colt Island garden, also has rocks behind it. And these rocks would also lend to the heat. And you could see that low vegetation, and those are all potato plants. And here's a picture from the mid-1850s where these women in Huna are planting potatoes, and you could see that she's holding a digging stick. And by the size of this lot or plot of land, people grew potatoes to trade also. They didn't just grow them for one family. It would be a trade item. And here's a woman in 1905 harvesting her potatoes, and you could see that the potatoes aren't what you think of as a big Idaho baker. They're very, very small potatoes. They called them fingerlings. And John Muir does mention eating potatoes with the Tlingit in the mid-1850s, and he said they were about the size of walnuts. They also had round ones. And here's a Haida gardening tool. This was a gift of Harris Natkong. The edge of it is hammered down, and it's probably a copper spike that came off of one of the shipwrecks and was hammered down and put onto this tool. And here in Kodiak in 1914, the Alutiiq people have been gardening since time immemorial, is how they put it. And you could see the massive amounts of kelp that he's putting in these garden rows. This isn't just throwing a little bit of seaweed on it. And then at around 1915, there was a loss of gardens. In 1915, the Fox Farm permits were issued to Euro-Americans, so people would show up at their garden site. In 1915, the Daltons showed up on the Indian Island garden site, which they had had for generations, and they were met by gunpoint that said, I have a Forest Service permit that says I can be here, and you no longer can garden here. And there were gardens in Glacier Bay, and again, the Glacier Bay gardens were lost because it became a national park. There's also a lot of contaminated soils from U.S. military sites that when people want to get gardens going again and revitalize gardens, you have to be very aware that there's a lot of sites, and DEC has lists of the places, because the Galena, which is up on the Yukon River, was planting their garden on a contaminated site for many years. And the Bureau of Land Management didn't recognize ownership that wasn't being lived on. So if you said my garden was here for generations, but it was on an island that had that sunny southern-facing front, and you didn't live there, because you usually would plant your garden on the way to fish camp, and they wouldn't recognize that people owned these lands. And this is 1911 in Klukwan, and you could see, this is in front of the schoolhouse, and you could see what a great vegetable garden they had. And then there are certain guidelines that the USDA is coming up with if you want to plant gardens. Potatoes are susceptible to a variety of diseases, and they get these just from the soil. And the diseases the potato get don't affect us, but it will affect yields of potatoes so that you won't get as big yields. So when you go to get potatoes, they can test if they have viruses, so it's good to get a virus-free potato, so I said to the USDA, where do you get those? And there's not many places you can get them. You also want to grow Alaska potatoes in the Alaskan soil. And there are some people in Fairbanks that have some of these virus-free potatoes. And here's Klukwan. 90 years later, they started that garden up again in the exact same spot that you saw that 1911 picture. And here's the Arboretum, which is in Juneau. It's the Juneau Arboretum, and you could see that they're using fucus for seaweed on this garden. And then this past summer, I traveled to a lot of the different villages, and this is the village of Angoon people, but they're here at Celebration last year. And then I went to Angoon and met them, and they again want to start their own garden, which they haven't done for quite a few years. And this is Potato Point in Killisnoo. And I read the records up in Anchorage in the archives, and in 1952, Angoon had 4,000 pounds of potatoes. And here I am in a potato patch that was probably used about 100 years ago, and I'm holding my hands out because you could see the garden rows are also very high, which was another really good way to have drainage instead of just a little tiny mound. There's also a lot of plant use and gathering being renewed, and this was Ida Calmain, who's teaching an ethnobotany workshop at the Skagway Traditional Council. And this is the hands below are showing how you handle the stem of the Devil's Club. Actually, the thorns wind up it in a helical pattern, so there's little spaces that you can handle it in that don't have the prickers on it. And the interior of the plant is used for teas, as well as when you get burned by the Devil's Club, you take another piece of it and peel it carefully and put that on the burn too. And this is Yaniate. This was being picked while we're at the workshop, and in the spring you could eat the Yaniate right away. It's also called Indian celery, and so she's just peeling it and munching on it as we go along the shore. And here's Martha. She was collecting the roots from the Yaniate, and she was also collecting roots from the Devil's Club. Martha's from the Yukon, and there's many plants on the coastal area that don't grow inland in the Yukon. And she's been an ethnobotanist all her life and still is very happy to get some of the plants from the maritime coast. So when I had first seen that garden in Glacier Bay, I didn't realize there had been that much gardening, and the rows of that garden were so high they actually came up to about my neck, which probably would be 5 foot or 4 feet tall rather. And I just didn't even think it was a garden. And then I did a little research, and a friend of mine said, well, my grandparents grow these old potatoes. So I thought, well, how old could they be? And I wasn't really interested. And then he kept telling me, so 3 months go by, and I finally said, okay, I'll go talk to your grandparents. Well, it turns out his grandparents are Richard and Nora Dauenhauer, and were growing this potato, and through oral history, they traced it back for several generations. And Maria Miller in Haines was the one that was growing it and had kept it going. So these old potato cultivars aren't here by accident. They've been nurtured through generations of people taking care of these, because that's what you use to plant next year's potato patch, the same potato seeds that you've grown. And then I saw an article online about Julie Coburn. She had a potato that her great aunt canoed down to Seattle and came back with this potato. So I read that and I said, well, that'd be interesting if we could get that potato and see if maybe people could do DNA on it and figure out where did that potato come from. So Julie Coburn is in her 80s, and her daughter, Jean Brennig, teaches at the University of Alaska Southeast. So it's interesting that I got 2 of these potatoes. One was from a professor at University of Southeast, and the other one was from Jean Brennig, who's a professor at UAS, but on loan to she's from UAA, I think, or Fairbanks, but she was on loan that year. So I took these 2 potatoes and I contacted the Potato Genome Project, which I didn't know existed, and said, would you be interested in taking these potatoes and doing some DNA testing? Well, they were here. They arrived here in Juneau. An entomologist, a plant geneticist, and a nematologist who studies soils, and they were so excited about these 2 potatoes. And here Chuck Brown is on the right side, and then Richard Dauenhauer and myself and my daughter, who's a biochemist, and she was doing some soil studies. So that was us collecting the potato from Dick's garden. Well, it turns out after they did do the DNA, what they do is they plant the potatoes, and then when the leaves grow, they take the leaves and extract the DNA from the leaves. So at first, Chuck thought, well, these look like the Ozette potato, which the Makaw Nation in Washington grows. But then after doing the DNA, he realized that they're related but a different potato. So now we have a new variety of Native American potato, because the Ozette is considered to be a Native American potato because it was grown by the Makaw probably 200 years ago. And then Maria's potato, we thought at first would be the same as the Kassan, but it also, again, is just related, but a completely different potato. So there's 5 Native American potatoes recognized by the USDA, and 2 of them came from Alaska, which totally amazes the National Science Foundation. And here's just some of the varieties. This is potatoes in South America. So when we're talking about nutrition, we're not talking about like eat a baked potato, but there were all these different varieties. There were potatoes with yellow flesh and purple flesh, and every time the interior of a potato is different, it's higher in certain things like antioxidants. And here's the DNA comparison. They do it, the comparison that they do are very similar to paternity tests, but they're designed for potatoes. So you could see that if every blue bar had matched up, they would have been exactly the same, but just because some do, that they're related. So he did recognize that all three were different, and that earlier you had seen the map of South America. Well, these potatoes don't trace back to being from Europe, so the Russians didn't bring them. And they don't trace back to being from any European soils or Peru. They trace to the Chilean potato or the Mexican potato, potatoes from Mexico. And what they do is they have these extensive charts that look very similar to charts that you would look at if you were looking at your family. And Chuck Brown he's the geneticist, he spent 8 years just collecting potatoes in South America. And so that's why he has such an extensive collection to be able to look at. And then I thought, well, if we're getting these potatoes and we had traced those, then it would be interesting. There's Russian Old Believers that live on the Kenai Peninsula. So we went up there, and that's Joe Cool and Chuck Brown, both plant geneticists, to collect some Russian Old Believer potatoes. And this is Nina, so she thought we were all crazy, but took us to her garden and gave us some different samples of potatoes. And then Nina has a cafe that only seats 3 people. So Chuck Brown and Joe Cool and I had some borscht and potato pierogies. And this is Somalia, and she's growing potatoes. She left Siberia in 1940 and lived in China for a long time, and still has her potatoes that she was growing in China. And then from China she went to Korea and still has her potatoes she's been growing since she lived in Korea. And she doesn't speak English, she still speaks a very old Russian dialect, but we had another younger person there. So she gave us some of these samples of potatoes also so that we could trace some of those back. And then this is Chuck, and he gives genomic lessons to children, so he's explaining to the children about potatoes, probably that their eyes also, in a primitive variety, helically spiral up the potato just like those thorns on the Devil's Club. Then I thought there might be an old-timer that would be still growing potatoes, and sure enough, we found an old-timer in Homer, and he was growing potatoes that were there when he arrived in 1940. Somebody gave him some starters, and he's still growing that variety today. And one of the first things they do is cut the geneticists, these are both their hands here, they cut them open to see what the inside is like, because if it's pure white, then it'd be a starchier potato, but if there's yellows or different colors, then it means that it's higher in phytonutrients. And here's just an example of some of the interior of potatoes. And the USDA Agricultural Service, here's Chuck Brown and Roy Navarre, and what they did is examined about 100 varieties of potato, that some of them are wild and some are cultivated, and I'll just read what they found. So Navarre and Brown's research on 100 wild and commercially grown potatoes has turned up 60 different phytochemicals and vitamins. Among them are vitamin C, folic acid, phenolics such as flavonoids and ketocoamines. These last compounds may help lower blood pressure. Prior to an Institute of Food Research report in 2005, it had only been found in a Chinese medicinal plant, Lycium chinense. Following up on the Food Institute's research, Navarre and Brown used new methods to analyze these compounds. So all the other tests that had been done on potatoes prior to this were done using a really old-fashioned method, and nobody had decided to go back and retest the potato until this team did. And one of the other problems with this gardening and sustainability has is the weather and the climate change and the effects that it's having on the land. So when you do go to garden, there's certain methods that you can use that'll strategies for your gardening. And I also have in here with the glacial rebound, the loss of petroglyphs. And the reason I tied this in is because from South America, the tobacco had been traded up, and a lot of people were traveling, and the potato was probably also traded up here as well. And when you go around the state into these areas where these plants came from, there's petroglyphs. And then when you look at some of the petroglyphs here and compare them, you'll see certain similarities. Here's one. This is in Juneau, and it's an intertidal, and it's doing very well intertidally. And that's a close-up of it. And here's one in 1933 in Auk Bay. And then today I went, not exactly today, but recently I went and took a photograph of this one. And that's what it looks like today. You could see it's buried under about 2 feet of soil, and this moss and lichen is destroying the rock. You know, as it gets foothold, the rock gets destroyed, so you really can't even see it. And before, the ocean used to hit this all the time and keep it clean, but now because of the glacial rebound, the water doesn't always come up to this point anymore. Here's another one that you could see a lot of the different motifs on. And then I just did a little close-up because these are some of the faces that you would see. There's sometimes the simple face with the 2 eyes and the mouth, and sometimes the profile. And there is a profile on this. And that's what it looks like today, with these trees just collapsing onto it. You could still see one motif. And that's a close-up of it. So since 1933, since I've been photographing it for a year, it has really deteriorated. Because at first I thought, oh, in the winter, the cold will kill all this moss and lichen, and that didn't happen. And this is another one. You can barely see it. It's also in Juneau on the water. So what I did is I went down there in the pitch dark and took this photograph. So you could see how deep the rings look in this photograph, but looking at it with the bare eye, you can hardly even find the petroglyphs. Here's one that is actually near Sequoia National Park, because I was trying to learn how to document them. So here's an example of what it looks like, and there's actually handprints that are surrounding that dark V. And then this is what the archaeologists would write up. They would go into a program, and you could see some of these. You could see more up close exactly what was going on. Now there's one there that they call a centipede, and it'd be on your left. And I was just in Santa Fe, and I saw that same centipede motif on a rock petroglyph there, and footprints on some of them. They're all scratched into the rock. And that's the end. And thank yous of people that have worked on the project.